Welcome back to Heads and Tails. I'm Henry Faber, one of the founders at Oppidum, and this is a real treat to have not one but two great legends talking to me this morning. And the gruesome twosome is going to create all the more adventure and action for today's conversation, I'm sure. This is really a story of a business dream, or maybe it's a dream business. And it began way back at school when these guys were naughty teenagers, where I believe I'm right in saying as a punishment for a naughty prank, Charlie and George were first tasked with putting on a party for their housemaster's 6-year-old. And the rest is really history. So through uni and early careers, they honed skills, created games, entertained young people, and they've been doing that all around the world ever since. I think it's 2007 when Sharky and George officially got going, and they've been putting on all sorts of adventure and growing with this amazing attitude of anything is possible ever since. These days, that is as true for adults as it is for children. So perhaps you don't have kids, or perhaps you're not interested in a young children's birthday party. Stay tuned in. There's all sorts of madness for every generation. Both George and Charlie are married, and I believe I'm right in saying have herds of young children between them. George is also a governor at Sandroid, so we know he's got an educational penchant kicking along on the side. And alongside all sorts of personal passions and clever skills, I know they're both involved in the well-known annual fundraiser they set up, Midnight Madness. Hoping we'll hear a bit more about that. And they're also both published authors with their book, Don't You Dare. The list goes on, and this intro could be double the length, but let's see what this conversation throws into the mix. So thank you both very much for spending a little bit of time with me this morning from your busy schedules.
Having it.
So you guys know that what Oppidum is obsessed with is mentoring. We're all about mentors and the role of mentors. I'd love to know whether you had obvious mentors. Were you aware of mentorship? What's your perspective on this as a theme?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and I think, for me personally, it's been a few over the years, not one from the beginning to end, but certainly at the beginning, our organised housemaster who sort of identified the fact that maybe we were slightly kind of immature, but a good punishment would be to entertain the kids as opposed to anything else. And I think he kind of identified that quite early, and then he really kind of pushed us into not doing a normal, going down a normal avenue. I remember him being rather disappointed when George came back saying he'd got a job doing financial headhunting. It's like, oh, George, I thought you were going to do something much more interesting than that. And I think it was just, for both of us, like a lot of little bits like that gently kind of pushed us in for us, a more interesting direction. And then I was going to say, actually, George's dad, who is an entrepreneur himself, and my parents less so, and I think he really kind of inspired us to really go for a proper business. And so that was a sort of a little moment. And then
he was to me, and then consequently to Charlie, if you're doing something that makes other people happy in your job, then you'll be fulfilled and have a great time in your career. So I think that's quite a good line to go with.
I think it's nice also because I'm not sure that your school, which I went to as well, was traditionally necessarily known for pushing those boundaries with random decisions. And there's a bit of serendipity that your housemaster / mentor was sort of a bit of a mentor to me as well, because he got me interested in Italian, and I ended up studying Italian for a degree. So there's a different routes to different passions there, but clearly a strong mentor from the beginning. Can I ask, you guys do something which, let's face it, is unserious in lots of ways. It's deliberately lacks seriousness, but it's a serious business. How do you make something so unserious serious in your day-to-day?
We try not to, if at all possible. There are obviously, when you get to a certain size, there are some serious things you have to keep on top of, and I think Charlie and I try wherever possible to get people better than us at those things, doing those things, so that we can focus on the fun and the less serious stuff. But you're right, we do always have to bear in mind that we've got to tick all the right boxes from a serious perspective. How about you, Charlie?
Yeah, it's funny because I think we're trying to go kind of full circle at the moment, because obviously you start and you're just having lots of fun doing all the parties, and then you grow and you've got to look after members of staff, and you get right down into the nitty gritty of the business. And we're just at the moment building and have been over the last couple of years, the structure such that George and I can really get back to the content creation, and the going out and meeting people, and doing the things that we're actually good at, as opposed to, the finance and the HR and all of those bits are very important, but not necessarily our forte. And I think it's, I'm sure you would agree, it's quite difficult to kind of extricate yourself from those things. But yeah, I think it's quite important to understand what you're good at, and then try and refocus on those things as you grow.
If you can publish a handbook on escaping from the weeds, please do share it. I'd love to love to learn something there. You guys have been working with young people and kids all your lives really now, or your adult lives. Has that affected your perspective on education? I don't know if you have a strong philosophy or ethos on education that you'd be willing to share a little snippet of.
There's so many things that just spring to mind when you say that. Over the years, I remember actually very early on, so at the beginning of every single party, we always get the children to come in and write their name on a name sticker and put it on their chest, just so that you can, immediately you can say, right, Henry, come over here, or Charlie, get involved with this. And I just remember being so surprised that almost every single party you'd get 2 or 3 who'd write their names in mirror writing. And I've always thought it'd be the most amazing sort of psychological study that we've done these years and years of parties, and looking at who it is and why that happens and at what age it happens. But there are little sort of windows into learning to read and write and speak that we see a lot of. But on a broader educational schools perspective, there are certain schools in London particularly that are going to remain unnamed, that when you're doing a party for them, you think, oh my goodness, because they generally tend to be known for their academic focus. And particularly if we do a party for them on a Friday afternoon, so it's been a busy week of school, and they come bowling into the party, they tend to be really wild, and it's quite often, it's probably a bit harsh to say, but quite often quite rude, and not great at playing with each other. The focus has been on education, academics, and they bowl into a party and then end up effectively fighting for 2 hours. Whereas when you're dealing with a school whose focus is much broader and tends to be a little bit more on kindness, extracurricular activities, as well as the work side, they tend to be better at playing together. And so it's a really interesting comparison that it really does come out, especially when we speak to the party team that do a lot of the parties.
Yeah, I mean, and yeah, I think that's certainly true. Another thing is, I don't know, there does, certainly when we were DJing right back in the day, doing kind of the little sort of 12, 13-year-old parties, and there was a big difference between those that have been educated and lived in London versus those in the countryside. And in terms of kind of staying kind of youthful and playing and sort of having fun together, as opposed to becoming sort of cooler earlier, and then having sort of being concerned about kind of looking silly on a dance floor, or I don't know. It's a very kind of silly thing, but it was very kind of clear when we were young that there was a sort of clear distinction between schools that maybe have a bit more space to kind of run around and play and remain youthful, versus the London schools, which isn't to say that one is better than the other, but just felt like kids for longer in the countryside, which
it's worth saying that Oppidan's experience mirrors that exactly. We visit schools in London and further afield, and generally the further towards the Sandroid we go, the happier those kids seem, and also the less self-aware of how they might come across, and often that stands them in really good stead in things like assessments, which are much more personal and character driven than they ever were back in our day.
It was really fascinating how it came out over COVID. So for the year and a half, 2 years of lockdown, we did a lot of stuff on Zoom for schools. Quite often it was the year 8s when they just finished their common entrance, and they were missing that amazing 2 or 3 weeks at prep school where you're meant to be just having the most blissful few weeks together with your mates in the sunshine, going on trips, all that sort of stuff. And we came in and did a sort of program of music video making and escape rooms and all sorts of fun, and discos, all on Zoom. And particularly making music videos, you could tell just immediately what sort of the dynamic was within the group. So you'd have 50 or 60 children all in the same year group. With some schools, half of them would have their cameras off, not engaged, not up for it. With a few schools, they all just mucked in, happy to look completely stupid, even though they're 12, 13-year-olds, up for putting wigs on, dancing around like prats, and just not worried about what their peers thought of them, which I thought was quite special.
Definitely. And a lot of people listening to this will be either working with children, working in schools, but a byproduct of that is working with parents a lot. You guys have done a lot of working with parents over the years. Without sticking off us in it too much, I'd love any kind of great learning or takeaway you've had that you could pass on, a tangible takeaway from working with parents over the years.
I'd say my number one, actually two things. Firstly, they're all super busy. If you want to find the busiest person in the world, it's a parent. Whether they're working parents or not, they're managing other people's lives as well as theirs. They're acting as PA, mentor, doctor, hotel, laundrette, everything. And so it's just to really take that into account with any discussion. They may well have had only 2 hours sleep, trying to make decisions on a load of different things, and you're ringing them up to ask about what flavored cupcake they'd like at their children's party. So I think it's super important to always be aware of what might be going on in the background in a parent's life. And the other one,
I love that the awareness thing. I think is great. Having that awareness, a lot of people lack that emotional empathy sometimes.
It's really important. The other thing I was going to say is some parents are not naturally adept at playing, just by the fact that maybe they were the type of people that after school, after university, they got straight into a very serious job, always been very serious and taking themselves quite seriously, and then they end up with children, and it gets to a point when the children are 5, 6, 7 and wanting to play, and there are definitely some parents who are quite nervous about getting that wrong. And so we have had parents in the past calling up saying, I've got a 7-year-old boy and he's got a couple of friends coming around for a whole afternoon, and I'm a bit nervous about what to do. And you sort of think, hang on, how can you've got to that point? But actually, it is a real thing. And so we've definitely tried to give people a little bit more confidence and just go for it and not feel silly about and actually playing with their children.
It's kind of play in general is sort of a big thing for us at the moment, because we do a lot of kind of corporate and adult stuff, and it's actually very similar what we do with the children as to what we do with the adults. And you can really get them going and having lots of fun. But a lot of businesses are really recognizing the importance of play for creativity and general kind of work-life balance. And so we'll end up doing fun sports days, quests, adventure races, all the same sort of stuff that you do with the kids, but it's almost identical with the parents. And I think more and more people are identifying the importance of that in work life, adult life. And yeah, we've had some amazing sort of private events where there's been a speech from a very wealthy businessman who, this was just one that I'm thinking of a few years ago, and he did this speech. We did this amazing fugitive party for him where he wanted to run off and have all of his friends chase him down. He did this big speech at the beginning saying, look guys, we've all got very busy lives all over the world, and what we've just got here is like a really fun game, and I just want you guys to like get involved, have a laugh, be silly, and play essentially. And it's it seems to be that thought sort of seems to be going into business quite a lot as well.
I think that's probably a nice time to ask you a bit about teachers. There's so much press about the pain and awful difficulty and complexity and all the things that are going wrong in the profession of being a teacher. And I wonder if Sharky and George have a way to solve some of that, or if you could add something to the mix. I have a feeling I know what you might say, but it would be great to hear any reflections you have on how teachers might refine some of the fun in their own work.
It's so tough, isn't it, to try and have a view or make a comment on that without actually being a teacher, because I can see they're under so much pressure in so many different directions, and somebody coming from outside saying, well, what you should do is this, that, and the other. I'd always be really nervous about that. But if they did have the time and the energy, because I know it must be knackering as well being a teacher. I was looking back at my favorite, best teachers, the most memorable ones, and I'm sure everyone's got one or two from their time. But in particular, at prep school, I had a science teacher called Mr. Balding, who always wore a bow tie and smoked a pipe. So you could smell, if you wanted to find him to sign something, you could always find him because you'd smell the smoke going down the corridor. But what really, really struck me was that every single lesson he'd do, there was some element of comedy or practical nature. So he loved Tommy Cooper and used to put on a fez and then do a science experiment, which he would usually get wrong once or twice to start with, smash a few things, break a few, drop a few things, and make a whole joke out of it, and then do it properly. And it just meant you remembered it just so vividly, every single thing that he did. And I think if you can bring some particularly practical versions of what you're doing, I know that's obvious in science, but in every subject you can do a practical version of it. It just makes it so much more memorable, and then obviously interject some games and comedy, and play into everything.
It feels like there's a sort of a lost maverick teacher that now maybe the system doesn't quite allow for in the same way, or doesn't give as much oxygen to. But Charlie, I don't know, you were going to add something maybe.
Yeah, no, well, it's just I'm sort of looking at prep schools at the moment in the countryside, and it's interesting seeing all of the different systems that people have, whether it's Saturday school or not, but there's like one or two that I've been struck by that do the diamond educational model, where the kids start educational at the beginning, and then actually there's a moment to sort of separate them out into girls and boys, because I think it's fairly well documented that they learn in different ways, and then they kind of come back together towards the end of the time at the school, and that kind of resonated quite well with me in terms of the parties that we see. And obviously girls and boys extremely well together for a lot of the times, but then there are just a few parties here and there where you like just having the boys all together, and maybe it's the sort of survival or the more sort of rough and tumble sort of parties, and it just kind of works that much better with boys, like putting them all in the mix. And then certainly in the same would be of the girls, sometimes it works a lot better when they're all together, separated out. I don't know if that's a controversial thing in education, or whether it's something that's recognized universally, but it struck me that we see that at parties, and it's got to be a good thing, I think, in education.
There we go. That's the multitasking parent. You're managing other people's lives. That's probably someone's Amazon delivery, isn't it? Well, but let's bring it back to you guys. I mean, you've been running Sharky George since 2007. You were wet behind the ears when you got going. You're now managing complex lives with kids of your own. Has having children affected the way you want to run your business?
Do you want to go, Charlie?
Yeah, congratulations, by the way, for those who don't know. Charlie's got one fresh out the oven.
I've got a 5-week-old, and so yes, having a little bit more sleep before going into the office would be helpful. But in terms of running the business, I don't know. It's having children and having two little, well, certainly my 4 and 6-year-old, having them going out to parties and experiencing Sharky and George, and sort of seeing it from a parent perspective has definitely been very interesting. In terms of how it's sort of changed how I kind of view and run the business, not so much, I don't think, but certainly you get sort of much more kind of insights from the parties and how you're going to do the entertainment side of things. When you've got kids of the age that you're running events for.
Yeah, I was definitely going to say it hasn't really changed things massively in how I perceive it, apart from just having my own 3 guinea pigs to test stuff on, which is really fun because you can at their parties try out completely new stuff that you wouldn't necessarily try on the client, and then see if it's something you want to continue with. For my 10-year-old son last December, we did a full-on paint fight in the snow, had a massive bonfire, but then we had the red team, the blue team, with water pistols full of blue paint or red paint, water bombs full of paint, everyone in full white overalls. Total chaos, but absolutely brilliant. So definitely something I want to do again.
It's lovely. It sounds, listening to the both of you, like you've been forced to be back at the coalface by being around children constantly, not through choice. And it sounds like it sort of relit a bit of a fire to be doing more of that and to step away from HR and all those other things. So it's probably quite an inspiring point in time, despite feeling more tired and probably pulled in 10 different directions, I can imagine.
Yeah.
That's great. We've covered a lot, and we could double the length of this conversation, so we might have to do a part 2 another time, I think. But I'd love to finish by just giving you the chance to reflect on what next for Sharky and George. I know you're doing a lot with adults. I know there's all sorts of other things, both business and philanthropic, that you're involved in. Anything you'd like to, what's the next challenge? What's the next mountain to climb for you guys together?
Johnny?
Well, yeah, we're sort of heading off around the world with kids clubs, around the Mediterranean and looking into the Middle East, and we doing the kind of the holiday kids clubs. We sort of approach it often. George's wife used to be in travel, so she used to go on lots of kind of familiarization trips and see lots of hotels and kids clubs, and now a lot myself. And to a T, they tend to be essentially a classroom in a hotel where all the kids go, and it's fairly dry, and we're trying to turn that a little bit. I mean, obviously there are better kids clubs than others, but trying to turn that a little bit on its head and really bring all of that experience from millions of parties, or at least tens of thousands of parties that we've done, and get the children out of the air-conditioned spaces and onto the beach, pleasure hunts and pirates and into the swimming pool, and really kind of getting involved in the beach and in the environment that they're in, as opposed to so often they're kind of sidelined into a space which could be kind of almost anywhere in the world. So that's a big challenge, but yeah, it seems to be going quite well. We're in 7 hotels now in Europe and growing. So yeah,
that's a good one. And then I guess the other thing is doing lots and lots more for grown-ups, and especially with big companies being aware that they can't really do the traditional Christmas party or staff party. So taking all of our experience in making fun for children and then bringing that into a more of a corporate environment, without being sort of cheesy naff team building. And so that's becoming much more popular, because a lot of these companies will need to do an event during the daytime without alcohol that is engaging, exciting and fun, but not naff. And I think we've hopefully cracked that and doing lots and lots more of it.
Sounds like a couple of great sweet spots there. Excited to see that happen. And yeah, really grateful for the time you guys have shared. It's super inspiring. And I think you're probably not even aware of how close you sit to education in a more traditional sense, because you have such a sort of wild and fun perspective on it. And I think there's so much that teachers, parents, kids could learn from that kind of an attitude around adventure and fun. So really appreciate you guys sharing the time and wishing you well. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Henry.